Yo, what's going on, guys? So we are one day into the early access of Diablo 4. So in today's video I want to give you my opinion on campaign, early endgame, and I'm also gonna show you build that I have been playing. And no worries, I'm not gonna include any spoilers. So when it comes to the campaign, I actually did plan to just skip all of the cutscenes and so on and just zoom through the campaign as fast as possible to reach the endgame. But towards the end, I actually really liked the story and it was very interesting. So I started listening to the cutscene, watching them, and so on. So I would say around maybe half of the story is kind of slow. It's not like super interesting. There's actually, I think Act 2 was pretty interesting. Act 3 was kind of whatever, to be honest. But after that, it's very nice, in my opinion. But one thing that I didn't like is that there are some characters that show up in the story and straight up just die immediately. So I wish that Blizzard gave some more story to these characters, especially some that we know about them from the past or even were in some past games. But yeah, in this game, it's just they just die and that's it. Another thing that I didn't like is that you get mount in Act 4. I wouldn't mind it that it is this late, but to be honest, Act 3 just has so many quests where you just have to run through the entire zone just to talk to some guy, maybe kill some monsters, and then walk through another zone is just crazy. It really feels like Blizzard just gave us Mount right after this act so that we appreciate it more. So we just had to run so much just on our feet. It didn't feel super bad because I was playing Rogue, so Rogue is actually pretty fast. But yeah, I think it's either they should give us Mount at the beginning of Act 3, or maybe Act 3 shouldn't have as much running, maybe give us more waypoints or things like that. There's definitely less waypoints and yeah, a lot of running and maybe some quests in between them, so it doesn't feel that bad. And when it comes to the combat, so the difficulty and so on, to be honest, I think it was maybe a little bit too easy. I actually have been playing on difficulty 2 for the most part, only at the beginning on the World Tier 1, and it was kind of easy. And especially it was easy in a bad way, I would say. So first of all, bosses don't really have that crazy mechanics. You just move to the left, to the right, or move outside of the fire, and that's it. There's no like interesting mechanics on bosses. And on top of that, when you do quest story dungeons, they don't have almost like any monsters. You just go through them for like 2-3 rooms. There's 0 monsters, and then on the third room there's like 3 monsters. You kill them, and then you go through another 2 monsters. It very often feels like this. And then you do from time to time like one normal dungeon, maybe to unlock one of your aspects or something like that. And suddenly you have so many monsters. It's actually crazy fun and so on. And then you go back to the story and again there's like no monsters. But maybe that was the intent. Maybe campaign is just supposed to be story mode. You just go through it, easy mode, and that's it. But one thing I can definitely say is that at the end, it actually, for some reason, suddenly jumps up in difficulty. So the end is a little bit hard. Maybe you should level up a little bit more before the end. That would be my one tip. Okay, so after the campaign, you start doing the end game, and the first thing you unlock is Tree of Whispers. So at this point, you have two goals. First of all, you have to reach a high level, preferably between 45 to 50, and I finished the campaign around level 42, maybe 43. And then you want to do the capstone dungeon once you get a few levels, because capstone dungeon has level 50. And after you do it, you unlock World Tier 3, and I would suggest unlocking it as fast as possible because it just drops so much more gear and so much more quality of gear, and you get also more XP over there, and it's actually not that hard. You might look at the capstone dungeon, it's crazy hard, and you're gonna think that, oh, it's gonna be like this in the World Tier 3, but it actually is way easier. So if you struggle in capstone dungeon, it's fine. As long as you complete it, you can start doing the World Tier 3. And also early on, you can just rely on other people, so you can just do some events that someone else is doing and just tag along and yeah, get some additional loot. And the other thing that you want to do at this point is renown. So that's gonna be definitely divided, the opinion, like is it a good thing, is it a bad thing that you have to grind so many things. So you have to find all of the altars, do dungeons, unlock all of the strongholds and so on. So there is quite a lot of stuff to do, but I personally love that stuff. I have been just playing and doing one by one, and I just couldn't stop playing. I actually played for, I think, like 24, 5 hours, and competitionist stuff is my favorite thing. I love doing this in MMOs and so on, so personally, I really like this part of the game. But once I'm gonna unlock them, I guess we're gonna see how fun it's gonna be then. Because at this point, you pretty much just spam dungeons. So I'm gonna have to see how fun it's going to be. And another thing is Helltide. So when you're gonna be upgrading your items and maybe enchanting them at the occultist, you're gonna need some special materials, and these materials come from Helltide. And even when I was around level 45, I wanted to upgrade some of my items and I just couldn't because I didn't have my World Tier 3 unlocked to be able to do Helltides, because they only appear in World Tier 3. So there's just so many reasons to unlock it as fast as possible. So even if you're gonna struggle through the capstone dungeon, as long as you can complete it, it's fine. You definitely should try to do it as fast as possible. Okay, so now let me talk about the build that I'm playing. So I'm playing the Twisting Blade Rogue, and the one goal of this build is that I didn't want to use any trap skills. Maybe I was thinking about using Death Trap later, but from what I've seen, so many rogue builds are always using the poison trap, and I just don't really want to play trapple build. I actually would prefer to play a ranged rogue, but melee is still fine, and I definitely like the cooldown reduction from Twisting Blade, so a lot of rogue skills have cooldown, so it's very fun and nice playstyle, but I just don't want to play with traps. So what I decided to do is I went with imbuements instead. And if you look at the skills that I have here and you just want to copy whatever I'm doing, what I can definitely tell you is I have been swapping stuff constantly. The respecking in this game is kind of cheap. As you can see here, I'm playing only 3000 gold per point and I have 1.5 million, so it is very cheap. So I've been just constantly swapping things around, and even when you're gonna watch maybe one of my streams and you're gonna see what I'm playing, I might play something different. So the core of the build is that I'm using Puncture with Fundamental Puncture to apply vulnerability, and I'm using Twisting Blade to deal damage. It is leveled up to maximum and it's gonna reduce the other cooldown. For mobility, I'm using Dash, and I actually was using Disciplined Shadows. I mean, not Dash, the Shadow Step. And I was using Discipline Shadow Step for reduced cooldown, but recently I started using Methodical because it stuns enemies, and when I noticed that when I am dying, it's mostly at the beginning of the combat, so I just need to stun something at the beginning, so I'm no longer gonna have issues with them. Then Dash, just for additional mobility, and this is definitely one of the skills that I'm swapping around. When I'm doing some kind of hard content, that's the skill that I am removing. And then another thing is Dark Shroud. I am also using it from time to time if I need more survivability. So I would remove Dash and go for this, and I would go for the additional movement speed per Dark Shrouds. And then we go to the imbuement, which is the core of the build. So Shadow Step is ranked, Shadow Imbuement is ranked up to the maximum, and I'm using Enhanced for increased critical strike chance and Blended for vulnerable. So for single target, I am applying vulnerable through the Puncture, and for clear through the Shadow Imbuement. So whenever I'm gonna hit something, then they die, they explode, and they just apply vulnerable to everything. On top of that, when I do any shadow damage, which is mostly Shadow Imbuement, I also have a chance to stun enemies, which is very good for survivability. I actually have been dying a lot, and once I started investing into some kind of crowd control stuff like stuns, I started dying way less. I definitely still struggle with healing because I don't have that great of a crit chance, and once I have good amount of crit chance, which I think maybe is around 30%, that's when I'm gonna use the Siphoning Strike for some additional healing when you crit. So this is gonna be very nice for sustain. And another passive is Consuming Shadows for additional energy generation whenever you kill something with shadow damage. So for clear, I pretty much never run out of energy thanks to this. Another thing is cold imbuement. So poison imbuements and cold imbuements is something that I've been testing a lot. For a very long time, I've been playing just shadow imbuement. Then I started using poison imbuement just for bosses, and I would go for enhanced and the mixed. But then when I was saying that I was actually dying very often, I started using cold imbuement, because what cold imbuement does is that it not only it applies vulnerable, so it's additional source of vulnerable, so a little bit more damage, so I guess more uptime for vulnerable. Now both cold and shadow apply it, and also blended make it so you freeze enemies. So critical strikes with cold imbuements have 20% chance to freeze enemies, and it is only the lucky hit, and it's also crit, so it's not that high chance. But to be honest, with the amount of attacks you do, it actually happens very often. And I'm also gonna show you some of the items that enhance this even more. So you very often are going to either stun your enemies thanks to Shadow Crash, or freeze them with blended cold imbuement. And I'm still from time to time using poison if I want more single target, but for now I don't really struggle with poison with a single target, so I'm not using it. And here you also get additional damage against chilled enemies, so cold imbuement is actually giving you even more damage, but it's mostly for clear bosses. You're not really chilling, so it doesn't work for them. And precision imbuement for some additional crit chance, which is obviously pretty good for the blended cold imbuement. And here is just some additional stuff for lucky hit chance and energy generation. So when you hit something with lucky hit, you have a chance to generate energy. Then you get additional non-physical damage. Well, you get additional lucky hit chance with your non-physical damage. And second wind also gives you additional lucky hit chance when you spend energy. So you just want to spam as much energy as possible, so you'll get increased lucky hit chance. And here I am also using some, I guess, random passive, because I didn't really have anything to spend my points on anymore. So I went for Adrenaline Rush and Haste for some additional movement speed and attack speed. And the big passive is something that I actually was testing a lot, and I was using Victimize for a very long time, which gives you dealing damage to vulnerable enemy have 30 chance to cause an explosion, and it deals the original damage to them and surrounding enemies. So when you have high lucky hit chance, I think it's actually pretty good. It just gives you a ton of damage, a lot of explosions. But actually I already have a lot of explosions with Shadow Imbuement and some of the other items that I'm gonna show you. So I feel like my clear is very good right now, so I just removed it and I went for close quarters, because it gives you 20% attack speed and also 20% increased damage against crowd controlled enemies. So because we are using Cutthroat skill, which is Twisting Blades, and Puncture, which is Marksman, we always have 20% increased attack speed, and when both of them are active, you have 20% increased damage against crowd controlled. And because of the cold imbuement, you get basically this benefit, so they are always chilled. So cold imbuement by itself doesn't give you any damage, but thanks to Frigid Finesse and thanks to the close quarters, it actually gives you quite a lot of damage. But remember, you're not really CCing bosses, so it is mostly just for clear. But as long as you have good enough single target, which is what I'm not struggling with right now, this is actually pretty good. You could also go for Momentum for some additional movement speed and damage reduction, but I don't really feel like I need it, and everything else is not really good for this build. So that's the skills. Paragons, I'm not gonna talk about it yet because I don't really have any paragons. I just took some random damage and defense nodes for now, maybe in another video once I get more of them. Now when it comes to the items, the most important thing is obviously Twisting Blades. When they return to you, they spin around you for additional damage, and this is gonna proc a lot of the imbuement stuff, because you're not only gonna proc them through the a regular hit like this one, but also when they spin around you, which I'm gonna show you in a second. And for the other ones, I'm using this one. Damaging chilled on frozen enemy with a shadow imbuement has a chance to cause explosions. So this is just additional source of explosions. What I'm doing is I'm using cold imbuement. I am then hitting enemies, applying cold imbuement, then I'm swapping to shadow, applying shadow imbuement, and then they usually die, and when they die they trigger shadow explosions, and thanks to this they also cause cold explosions, so it's just more damage. It's actually not that much amount of damage, it's only well, I don't know why it is showing between below 400, it's like 380, and the roll is between 530 and 970. It might be because of the power level of the item, because it's upgraded or something, I don't know. But as you can see, it's below 1000 definitely, and just Shadow Imbuement deals 2000 with the explosion. So it's comparable, it's way lower, but it's still just good amount of additional damage. And this is why I removed the Victimize. If you want even more clear, you can also use this one, and then just have a ton of explosions everywhere. Next thing is your imbuement skill effect have 20% increased potency against vulnerable, which obviously enemies are almost always vulnerable, so it's just increased effect of it. This is something that is not super like needed for this build. I think this is actually the last thing that I got. And then for another offensive stuff, I'm using critical strikes with core skills, have 23%, increase my attack speed by 23%. So this is just a ton of attack speed, and you don't actually get that much attack speed in this game. So getting 20% from here and 20% from the passive is actually quite a lot of additional damage, and it helps you with generating your energy. And here I have an imprint, restore one of my primary resource when I crowd control enemy. This is not that much energy, but I'm crowd controlling enemies so often that it's actually a ton of energy. So I'm actually looking for a better version when I'm gonna drop one with 2, 3, or 4. It's gonna be so much energy, it's gonna be crazy. And for my amulet, I am using, when I cast an imbuement skill, I cause an explosion around me. So this is not that much damage, but it is actually very useful, because when you, let's say, shadow step on top of enemies and you press cold imbuement, you immediately are gonna chill enemies around you and maybe even freeze them. So this is just a very good form of defense. And then when you do that, when you're gonna press shadow imbuement, I believe this is already causing the effect from this one, so chance to release an explosion, and this one is also chilling them. And remember, every time you chill something, you have a chance to freeze them. So I'm actually not too sure if that specific explosion is also causing this effect, because it says damaging enemy with shadow imbued skill, and this is technically not using a skill, so it probably doesn't work this way, but still it damages enemies with, I mean, it applies the cold imbuement. And I guess it also damages them by a little bit. So yeah, that's something I have to test, I guess. And for the gloves, this is an effect that I've been using pretty much since the beginning. You just deal more damage depending on how much resources you have. And we generate so much resources, it's pretty much always up. So you get almost 20% additional damage. And for the defenses on my helmet, when I hit crowd controlled enemy, there's 30% to spread that crowd control effect. So that's another way of increasing your damage even, because you generate your resources and you also get all of the increased damage against crowd control enemies activated when this happens. And for the chest, you just gain additional armor and it's stacking. Then on pants, basic attacks grant me 20% damage reduction, so I just use my puncture very often, so it's almost always up, just additional flat 20% damage reduction. And on boots, Shadow Step has additional charge. So this way, I actually have my Shadow Step almost always up. I'm just using it pretty much every single pack of monsters. So with Shadow Step, I feel like I don't even need dash almost ever, but it's still pretty good for like world content when you are running between stuff and you don't have your mount always up. So I'm swap dash with some other stuff from time to time. And like I was saying earlier, the things that I would consider using is the Dark Shroud or Poison Imbuement, or maybe even Ultimate like Shadow Clone. I actually did test Shadow Clone a little bit and I didn't really like it that much. There is some other legendaries that I could use and I did test them, but for now this is the best setup for this build that I found. So now let me just show you how the gameplay looks like. So like I was saying earlier, I start with Shadow Step to stun enemy, then I use my Cold Imbuement to freeze them or chill them, and then Shadow to proc all of the explosions, and I move on to the next pack. And for the big monsters, remember to use Puncture. Oh, and the last thing I forgot to talk about is the specialization. So I was using Inner Sight for a very long time, and it's actually probably better early on, but right now I have so much energy generation that I actually swap to combo points. And I don't always go for 3 combo points, sometimes just 1, sometimes 2, depending on my energy. And for bosses, I still feel like Inner Sight is better, but for just clearing dungeons and so on, combo points is nice. And remember that you can just swap them any way you want, so you can just go through dungeons with combo points, and before a boss you swap to Inner Sight, so it's very easy. And it's even something that you can do with skills. You can just play this way, and once you reach boss you can remove dash and go for poison, or you don't even have to remove it if you have some additional levels from gear, so you can just go to your skills and put it on the bar and continue. Okay, so I realized that where I was there was not that many monsters, so I'm gonna show you it here. So again, shadow, cold imbuement, dash, shadow, and they detonate. And again, and you just continue doing it like this. Obviously, at some point your cooldowns are gonna misalign, so you're gonna have to use maybe different combination, but it doesn't really matter. Usually there is actually not that much thinking required. You just go through, press through a map, press your imbuements on cooldown, press your shadow step on cooldown, and so on. So it is pretty easy gameplay and very satisfying in my opinion. It's just a lot of explosion going on, a lot of damage, everything is constantly frozen and stunned and so on. So that's gonna be it for now. Whenever I'm gonna do some changes to my build, or maybe just reach higher tier content, and I'm gonna have my Paragon board unlocked, maybe obviously not fully, but just a little bit, I'm gonna show you the changes and so on. So thanks for watching and see you next time.